In this series of videos, I'm going to show you how to create a fully monetized API using Zuplo. We're going to have an API gateway, we're going to have a developer portal, we're going to have an MCP server, and most of all, we're also going to have self-serve API keys and plans that people can sign up and subscribe to. Over these 4 videos, what we're going to do is dig into all of those different aspects and of course get to a finished product, which I can show you right now. I've built a demo application to demonstrate this whole process, and I wanted to do something that was a little bit more like an actual production API that you would actually monetize rather than like a to-do list API, which, although is great for demonstration, doesn't have a whole lot of endpoints, and there's a couple of extra bits in here such as gating features and doing things with the MCP server that are much more interesting if you actually have an API in place. So the point of this is that it allows teams to create projects and publish changelog entries into a database and then query them using full text search, filtering and pagination so they can pull that stuff out again, basically like a storage space for changelogs so that you could use it internally to say, hey, what changes did we make on this particular release? And it's going to go back and tell you. Great API, but also a really good use case for an MCP server as well. So we've got here the developer portal. This comes direct from Zuplo, and you can see here that we've also got up at the top here a pricing tab with some price plans that people can subscribe to, a free one and 2 paid plans with different levels of request access. And you'll see here as well that there's an MCP server available on these 2 plans as well, which is actually a feature that we're going to add and we're going to gate in a later video. We also have the ability to register, sign up, generate self-serve API keys, do all of the things that you would expect out of a standard developer portal. Of course, we also have documentation and the API reference itself, which is fully interactive using the self-serve keys. So let's get the first video underway. What we're going to do is take our base API and get it into Zuplo and put the API gateway in front of it. So let's get started. So over here in Zuplo, I have a blank project, and to get this set up and running, I'm going to import an OpenAPI specification that outlines the API that I already built over on Vercel. So I'm going to go to import OpenAPI, bring in the OpenAPI document, and you can see I have 12 endpoints defined in here. So if I complete that import, then we get the full list of API endpoints, and you can see them all here. You can see what verbs are being used for them. But there's something here that we really need to change, because right now this isn't even pointing to anything. The request handler here, you can see, points to api.example.com/v1, which isn't going to work, weirdly. So we're going to have to set that up so it points to the actual API that we built. Now, I can do this using an environment variable. That's going to be the best way. So if we head over to settings and environment variables, we'll do a new one called base URL. And then we'll paste that in. That is where the actual API that I built lives. It doesn't need to be a secret, but I am going to get this set up across all of the different environments inside of Zuplo. Right now, we're working inside of the working copy. Now, what we need to do is make sure that we change this across the board for every single one of those endpoints. And we can do that in here. And you can see this is where that comes from, this server section. And we need to change that so that it's actually pointing to the environment variable that we just set up. If I grab this from here, we can just make a small change, and then we have env.baseURL, and that will get written into this when it passes. But the bonus as well is that if we go back to the root designer, it will apply that change across the board for every single one of these request handlers. So these are now all pointing to the right thing. So if we go ahead and try testing this route, what we can do is see if it's working. So let's go ahead and we'll create a project. I'll put an example body in here to try it out. I have undeployed changes. Thank you, Zuplo. I appreciate that. Let's Command S to save it. And that's been already deployed. So let's try the send request. We can see that we get a 401 unauthorized back here, and that's actually coming directly from Vercel. And this is something that I put in place just to ensure an extra layer of security. There's a shared secret that exists on that Vercel deployed API, and if Zuplo doesn't also pass that secret over in the request that it makes, it's going to reject them. And it's a way of making sure that only the Zuplo API gateway could make requests to that particular API. So we're going to need to implement that. And we can do it by using a quick custom policy that's basically going to set that header each and every time on any request that we make from the gateway. So let's do that and get this closer to working state. So we will create a new module over here. We'll do a request handler. We'll call it set request headers. And we're going to need to add some code for this as well. I'm going to comment that one out just for a second. We'll talk about that in a sec. So what this policy does is it checks to see if there is a user set on making the request on this side. So basically, is there an API key in place and can I get a user from that? If not, it's just going to reject it outright. If there is, then it's going to set the headers to this environment.gateway secret, and that's going to get passed over and authenticate on the Vercel side to make sure that the requests are legit. But we don't have this yet. So let's set this up inside of the environment variables. So we need to add our gateway secret. Again, oh, actually, you know what? Let's do that properly. That should be a secret because it is a secret. So let's set that up again properly. Gateway secret, paste it in, set it as a secret. We'll put it across all environments once again. We go back to our set request headers. You can see that this is going to be set now as this X gateway secret header on every request, which means that it's going to be seen on the Vercel side and it's going to allow those requests to go all the way through. So one of the other things that we need to do now is make sure that that policy we just defined exists on every single one of these routes. So if we go in here to policies, we can apply that en masse to every single one of these routes. So if we create a policy here, we'll do a custom code inbound policy, and we'll set this to the module name that we just created, set request headers. There are no options, so we'll just leave that blank and create policy. Let's actually give it a better name. We'll call it set request headers, just so we know when we look at it on the screen amongst the other policies that we know which one this is. And now we can apply this to every single one of the routes because we need it on all of them. We can select all from here and apply, save that project, and we can see now that we've got our set request headers policy in the request chain happening here. So we're in a good state. So now if we go back to the set request headers, we can see that there's this element here that I commented out, which is the request headers.set x consumer ID set to request.user.sub. Now, the point of this is customer isolation. This is going to pass over this consumer ID that's set to the subject of the API key that's being used. And this is so that every single API key can create data for itself in isolation. So there's no way of a particular API key being able to get data back from the service for any other projects that it doesn't have access to, and for any other customers that we might have inside of the system. So we need to implement this as well now. And the way that I'm going to do this is going to change as we move into the monetization aspect. I'll tell you why. But first of all, let's get this set up just so that we can test this end to end and have a demo of it at least working all the way through. So we go back to the routes right here. What we'll do is we'll use the create project route to demonstrate this, and we'll set an API key authentication policy on this. And now the reason I say that this is going to change is because when we add the monetization to this in the next video, monetization actually handles all of the API key access and authentication. So we don't need to have this policy here, but for testing right now, just to make sure that we can go end to end and make sure the gateway is set up correctly, we'll keep it here, but we'll remove it when we add monetization. We've got the policy set up here. What we need now is an API key with a subject that we can map to that request header to actually make the request. So if we go to services, and configure in the API key service, we'll create a consumer. This is the subject that gets passed over. So this is what handles the isolation. It can be anything. You can use UUIDs. That's a good way of doing this. We'll use a fake looking UUID in this case, something like that. That's UUID v infinity. No key manager required, no metadata required in this one, just for testing. We'll set up that key and we'll copy it. And then we head back over to code in here, and now we're going to test this. So let me just quickly show you how this is going to work. So that subject, the UUID, the fake one that I just set, is basically the value of this right here, request.user.sub. That's what's going to come back, and that's unique. So that can be used as a key to do lookups across the database and make sure that we're getting the right information back for each customer that uses this. So we've got our API key set up, so we'll be checking for API keys. We'll grab the subject from that API key and we'll pass that over and add it to the request headers along with our gateway secret and make the request over to the API. So I think we're good to do a test here. We'll go to projects and we'll set up our authorization header, which is bearer, and the API key that we just set. And we're going to need a body to test this out with as well. So I'll get an example from the OpenAPI document that I created that we can use here. This is what's expected on the other end. Just a name, a description, and a URL for this particular project. So let's send that request. And we get our 201 back fully created. So this has gone and hit the actual live API, made that, and we get the response back, which is awesome. So we are in a good place with the project right now. There's one other element that we should definitely add here, I think, before we get to the start of doing the monetization bit, and that is that we don't have any rate limiting, and that's important as well. We will create an inbound policy and add rate limiting. We'll do this by IP for now, and we'll set it to something that's quite reasonable. I think 100 requests allowed with any particular minute. This isn't the kind of API that's going to be getting hammered, so I think that this is legitimate. And we also want to make sure that we can differentiate between what is potentially dangerous traffic and what is standard traffic. And I think under 100 requests in a minute in this case is going to be fine. We can apply that also en masse to every single one of these routes. And then what we'll do is just make sure that our ordering is set up correctly as well, because we want to do the rate limiting probably earlier on in here. So we will set it to be above the first policy. That's where we're at right now. We have our gateway set up with our endpoints. We have the request setters for the headers. We've got our shared secret authentication in place that we know that the requests are being made directly from Zuplo. And we've tested it end to end. So we're now in a good place to start working on the monetization aspect. So in the next video, we're going to go through and create meters. We're going to create features. We're going to do the price plans, and we're going to go into the developer portal and make sure that all of that looks good. We will log in and do a creation of a self-serve API key with an actual authenticated user, and then via the developer portal, look at requests being made end to end using keys under monetization. That's going to be in the next video. Stay tuned for that. There's a lot more coming in this series over the course of the week. So I hope that this one was a great start for you. Do follow along, and I'll see you in the next one.